Well, thank you so much for joining us. Friend of the show, everybody. Cat Hammons is back. Cat, welcome.
Hi. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be back. So much fun.
Yes, and we are pleased to have you here. But you had mentioned as we started our kind of level testing that you had some questions, and I love questions, so please fire away.
Well, I'm going to ask you about writing on the movie side of life. I assume you guys are both still movie lovers, TV lovers. In a lot of shows right now, it feels like the narrative structure, the classic structure, the hero's journey seems to be changing. I don't like it, but I'm wondering if I'm like turning into the old lady who tells the kids to get the hell off her lawn. I'm trying to figure out how to describe it. It feels like there are stories with no resolution, and that seems to be okay. Or the resolution is mild compared to the stakes that were created, or the stakes are so small that the resolution seems a little overblown or disproportionate. And part of me says that's bad writing. And then the other part of me says, but is this a changing desire? Are people looking for different things in their narratives now?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Have you guys noticed any of that?
So I'll go first, and then Tim will say something much smarter than I have. Yes, I have noticed that, but I've actually noticed it in the board game space as much as, stories that get told on television. So let me kind of share my 90 seconds of board game stuff, and then we'll pivot. But basically, there is a movement, or has been for a decade or so, to kind of move away from player conflict or high interaction games to something that are considered more low player interaction, where it's almost like multiplayer solitaire. You're kind of doing your thing, you're building your engine, you're making your thing work, and then eventually the game ends and one of you has more victory points than the other. Or you've got this cooperative piece where the game system is the antagonist and everyone is working together to try to overcome, the game. There's a certain, I want to call it softness that's implied with that, which is I don't want high interaction. I don't want conflict. And so pivoting back to writing, I don't want that much tension. And I wonder the chaos of our world and the bleakness that my daughter's generation, for example, is really looking at the future going, the world's on fire and it's not getting any better. Whatever, I'm just going to do something else. And there's a lot of this checking out that I've seen. And I wonder if the old school, ratchet up the tension. Like I think of that movie, a simple plan, I think is what it was. It was, oh my God, that thing just grabs you by the throat. It will not let you breathe. And I just wonder if that kind of story is just harder to tell for this audience because the world is kind of grabbing them by the throat and not letting them breathe. They kind of like to take a friggin' break when they watch something. And so I wonder if it's more that, the nature of entertainment and what the audience wants is slightly different now from 30, 40 years ago.
As far as narrative is concerned, when I do get into a lot of the TV that I'm watching now, I don't have as much time as I used to. I'm a huge raised on TV, MacGyver, A-Team, Street Hawk, Airwolf, all of that stuff from the 80s. Now I have to pick and choose a little bit more, and I keep forgetting that there are so many great shows that I really like. Succession was to me such a well-written show.
Yeah.
And I'm also a huge fan of Severance.
Yes.
Because that is so, I love it. I love how smart it feels. I love how intelligent the writing is. In the heyday of Lost, when Lost was doing so well, I wished I was a lot smarter because it felt like there were so many things for the intellectual viewer that you could watch in real time, like allusions to books, allusions to, famous people or famous events.
Yeah.
But when it comes to sort of a basic writing and what I really, really enjoy, I'm a very big Twin Peaks person with David Lynch, who's sort of like, yeah, I know what's going on here, but I'm not going to tell you. You can figure it out. This is just rife with stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel both ways. I feel that there is a sort of television that is helping us unplug from the stresses that are out there. And so the stakes aren't as high. But also, if you want those stakes to be high, there's television for you. That's why I really haven't watched Euphoria. Is that the show with the kids?
Yeah, on HBO.
I watched
the show with the kids.
Yeah, look, Look, man, I watched one episode of that and it felt like it was 3 seasons long. And I was like, is this what the teenagers are doing now? I'm so glad I'm not in school. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. I used to love everything. Everything. Now it's like, if there's too much skin in it, and I'm like, well, good Lord, what are you people doing? Stop it. Don't need all this. I know what this is leading to.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right. And Netflix had an algorithm, meaning certain things had to be hit literally at certain times. And so for directors and writers and editors, they would be like, okay, this needs to happen at 21 minutes, blah, blah, blah. This needs to happen at 37 minutes, so on and so forth. Which on one hand, I'm like, that's a terrible way to write. But then I realized that's pretty much how most screenwriters have been trained to write anyway. It just doesn't have an algorithm attached. By page 21, you have finished the first act, and within the like something like page, let's say 12 to 21, you have to have the inciting incident, the thing that happens that kicks the story into gear, that starts us on the adventure with the hero. I mean, really, when you look at movies, they all follow the same formula, and skilled writers don't show us the formula. But for the most part, they do follow the same formula of, you have the inciting incident, kicks the story into place, the hero goes out and becomes a wanderer, they have to find all of the things that they need in order, basically, you could say, bring the magic back to the village kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, the all is lost moment where it seems like the hero will never win, all is lost. And then they come back wiser and more connected to whatever the community is. That's the standard formula for writing a screenplay.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, it's not necessarily the formula for some European productions like France. Beautiful movies, and you're always kind of at the end going, I wonder what I just watched.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like it's totally cultural in that there have been several South Korean films where I'm like, oh, well, this is they're going to wrap it up. Oh, wait a minute. No, there's another ending. Oh, wait, we've got another 20 minutes left. What are they going to do now? And so I definitely feel that, there's definitely a cultural shift in what happens in some films, which is such a pleasant thing because, someone takes it from there and then just dumps it into an American mainstream film and suddenly they've got an Oscar for being so different. It's like, no, I just watched a lot of South Korean films.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, it's really true.
I feel like I would be most intimidated to write a screenplay for Star Wars because I feel like any person who's anyone, like it could have been, name any great writer, any great screenwriter, any great writer in general. I just feel like there are so many constrictions that they must put on that. Like at some point they're like, do you think you could add like a 20-minute scene for about 20 more characters that we could make some action figures out of? Yeah. Actually, is it okay if we sort of back up a step? Kat, you, just to refresh some folks that are listening, you primarily write screenplays.
Yeah, that's right. I primarily write screenplays. For a long time, I was writing, a relatively long time, couple of years, I was writing Hallmark style or Lifetime style movies. And so the movie that I talked about last time I was on your podcast, Valentine's Town, did get distribution. Now it's on Tubi. I think you can rent it on Amazon Prime, all that good stuff. So that's great. I'm very happy. But now what I've been working on of late with my writing partner is an adaptation of a book that seems to be going very well. We're working on an adaptation of a life story which carries its own interesting difficulties, and just in general trying to work on some work for myself. Like my manager and my acting teacher keep saying, write something for yourself. And I have a really hard time doing that. Other actors, and this is such an important part of the business now, is this, self-definition. And other actors are more than capable, but I struggle to write things for myself. I don't see myself as a lead. I see myself as a very, very important, with many scenes, almost as many scenes as the lead, but secondary character, the comic relief kind of character.
Yeah. What an interesting thing to do then, to write something for yourself as the secondary character.
Yeah, and it's been an interesting journey. Like this sci-fi script I've been pondering a lot. The main character is me, but I don't want to necessarily play the main character. I want to play her friend who, again, when you're, resorting to the tropes of screenwriting, I want to play the friend who points out or who says the legendary line, you know what your problem is. You always have that person who's like,
Right.
this is what's wrong with you. If you fix this, life would be fixed. And I actually want to play that person. I want to bring the wisdom giver, the sidekick,
That's the Molly Shannon role in Serendipity.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
The plucky best friend who's wacky but has the insight and the wisdom to sort of tell you what the movie's about, while still being hilarious and adorable. Yes. I could totally see
Totally.
that.
Yeah, I would be perfectly happy the rest of my life just playing, funny sidekicks. Although I have to say, funny sidekicks are the ones you remember. And so maybe that's it. Maybe it's kind of a reverse narcissism where I'm like, no, I don't have to be the lead. I have to be the one everyone remembers forever. So, interesting. Have you guys started messing around at all with AI?
Oh, Art?
Oh, yeah. We have several episodes about AI. We had a conversation, Tim and I, about whether or not we see it as unethical or useful. We sort of landed in
yes, I remember that.
Yeah, we sort of landed on we don't want to touch it. And then the very next week, I came back with a refill going, well, this is kind of how you could use it if you needed to. Because my analogy is I always, say I don't want to be that guy who at the turn of the 20th century wouldn't get in an elevator that was self-driving. Because it needs to have a driver. Like, I'm not going to get in a box and press a button and trust that it's going to show up at the right floor. Like, that's madness. And I think AI at some point will be that. But, AI as it is right now is not intelligent. It is, these large language models are really good at sort of combining information that's likely to solve a problem and present it as though it does, but it doesn't think. It's just sort of matching. It's almost like a really good version of a Mad Lib. Like insert noun here and I want this kind of noun that does these sorts of things. Like, is this what you're looking for? And I've talked with a lot of people about AI about, hey, if you have a level of expertise in something and you go to an AI model and you type in a prompt about the thing that you have expertise in and you look critically at what it gives you, 85% of it is going to be good, right down the middle of the fairway. But there's a fraction of what it's giving you that's either wrong or just off target. And because you have expertise in that topic, you see it. It jumps right out at you. You're like, oh, well, that's not right. I got to fix that.
Right.
But most people come to AI and they do not have a level of expertise. And so what they're doing is saying, oh, all of this is 100% right. And so then that actually, I think, gets fed back into the AI model. And so it's not filtering out the incorrect stuff. Most of the time, it's just sort of reabsorbing what's wrong. And then people the risk is that people will regurgitate the wrong thing and train the model to continue to provide inaccurate information. And, any system is sort of, moving towards chaos anyway. So the longer, the further out you allow that to go, the more wildly incorrect it's going to be. So that's kind of where we are. If they don't come up with a way for artificial intelligence to actually think, then we're going to get just a bigger cone of nonsense the further out we go.
That's a great point. For the first time really over the last couple of weeks, because I avoided it for the most part, both out of a sense of this is taking our jobs and out of a sense of this seems like a lot of work. I have to learn something else. I'm not going to mess with it. But I finally understood the prompt better because there is a way you can do a prompt that it can really yield some results. And so this idea that I've been kicking around again for this sci-fi movie. For a horror movie because I want to direct something. I've had this idea for a while. It started as just a scene that I wrote for a student, an acting student that I wanted them to have something a little closer to cinema because they were young, they were 16. And so the scripts that I had at the time that I was working with them on was like Disney stuff. And it's like this young person wanted to be a serious actor. So we need to give him some serious stuff. So I wrote something. decide to expand that into a short film. And I was like, how can I do this? What this small idea now needs to become a big one, going from 4 pages to 90 pages, or for a short film from 4 pages to like 15, 16. And how do I find the beginning, middle, and end? So I typed it in to Gemini on Google. And I was really surprisingly, annoyingly pleased with the results. Not because they were right on, but because they helped me think about the story differently. And so I went from having kind of no idea to a small idea to having possibility. And so I have to admit, as a writing assistant, it really helped. And just the biggest part for screenwriting, and I assume in some ways it's true for writing novels as well, is the outlining. That's where so much of the work is. That's where a lot of the brain power goes for me when I first am hitting up a screenplay, is the outlining, because the outlining is everything. If you mess up with the outline, it's very hard to get into the writing and rescue it. At least it is for me. Other people can just sit down and start writing a script and don't think about it. But for me to actually get to the end of a script, I need to have outlined it in advance. Otherwise, I'll get somewhere in the middle and get lost as to what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand that. And the risk is that as a writer, anyone, not you, but anyone who comes to AI looking for it to fill in the blank, and that you can sort of collude with it and dupe yourself into thinking, oh, I originated that,
Right.
and abdicate the writing to the tool, that's a problem. That's unethical. And really, you're going to get like a crappy result. The little testing that I did proved that you're really just cheating yourself, because it's just terrible. But I think using it the way that you're talking about, which is really more of a supercharged Google search, in a way, you're just like, hey, this is kind of what I'm looking for. Compile a bunch of possibilities for me and let me see. And it does that in seconds. And then you sort of scroll through and go, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Oh, I could take, number 2 and number 5 and combine them and do something else. So that's you just getting, I used to do this when I was a kid. I'd thumb through the encyclopedia. You just take the volume F or V off and you flip through, like, oh, volcanoes. Oh, volcanoes. Oh, yeah. And just learn. And so I think that, again, that is a really fast way to compile like elements and get possibilities. But we come back to that rule we talked about, 8 minutes ago, that some of that stuff's going to be wrong. And so, like, if you were doing it from a scientific standpoint, say, I don't know anything about terraforming a planet, and I have a sci-fi movie, and let me look into that. It might be a good place to start, but you still have to go verify what you're seeing is true. The other thing, Kat, is that if you've got kind of this is how everybody else does it, it's really good at that. It's compiling sort of the normal ways or the tropes that people would normally go to. And I like using it as a counterpoint. So I say, okay, here's the prompt. Show me a, murder mystery about X, Y, and Z. And it spits out, a bunch of different possible plots. Those are ways that you can now pivot and sort of subvert expectations while still staying true to the genre. I think that's a really clever way to use it, because now I'm not relying on the tool to guide my story. I'm actually using it to say, what is the audience expecting and how can I subvert that?
That's nice. That's a great idea. You're so smart. I've always known it, Art. You're a smart fella.
I still want to collaborate with you, Kat. So I'm not putting any pressure on you here in public in front of everybody. But yeah, I still want to collaborate with you. I know you don't have anything else going on, so that's fine.
Exactly. I'm okay to just hang out. I would love that. I really would. I would love. I want to write with you because I think it would just be fun, and also because it would be nice to have an outside of the box approach. So much of what's happening now is Hollywood. We're trying to figure out what the next step is. I mean, even as a country, we're going through this, and as an industry, we're going through this idea of, okay, heaps of money have been spent. We have spent just about as much money as you can spend on a movie. I believe Mission Impossible was $400 million. Easily, there have been movies that have been a $500 million at this point. And movies that are that expensive have huge demands on them. They have to make just incredible amounts of money, preferably the first weekend, almost has to be the first weekend, in order for it to start making its money back. And a lot of that, the wounds that are inflicted on the industry are self-inflicted. big studios have created this environment. And so the business really is kind of in some ways dissolving before our eyes. You even have independent TV coming up, independent film. We're familiar with that. There's always been some form of independent film. And I'll say the difference between independent film and a mainstream kind of movie is one is created by a studio, another for an independent film. Usually the producer has gathered money from a variety of sources and makes the movie and then sells the movie after the movie is made. That's kind of a general idea of independent film. It doesn't necessarily have huge studio backing, and it's made before it's sold, or it's made with the idea of, okay, we'll buy it once you make it, but you have to make it first. As in, you have to figure out how to pay for it first, and then we'll go ahead and buy it after it's done. That's an independent movie.
Right.
And generally, independent TV is just like the infrastructure was so different. How could you possibly make independent TV with multiple episodes that need to be made? And there's a show on Netflix called Tires, which was an independent TV show. You could say that about the first episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Yeah. Maybe first few episodes of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. They did that on their own and then sold it to Fox. More and more independent media in general is going to be coming up, like vertical shorts, which are terrible, terrible little things, but it's $1 billion business. Are you guys familiar with vertical shorts?
No.
I imagine it's just taking your iPhone and shooting it vertically, or am I just getting too much out of context?
No, that's kind of it, but that's more, you view it vertically, like it basically exactly like you said, but it's usually shot professionally. At least, the more popular ones are. And so vertical shorts are basically 1 or 2 minute videos, and they have a plot. They have, a soap opera style plot. They're terribly written. Usually they're written by AI. They're written with very inexperienced actors, but more and more like professional crew people are doing these kind of things, and more and better actors are doing them now. And so basically you have a story that if it were a screenplay, it'd be 90 pages. And so now you have basically either 90 or 45 episodes, and you break it down. And so it's like almost doing a drug deal. You give people a taste. Here's episode 1. You like that? Episode 2. Yeah. There you go. You like that? You think that's good? You like that? All right. Well, this next one's going to cost you. We're going to go 99 cents on this next one.
Yeah.
Keep it going till finally it's like $2.99 an episode, but they're hooked at that point.
Yeah.
And so you have people willing to watch stories in this way, which even with my gnat-sized brain at times in terms of my ability to concentrate, I just don't understand how that's enjoyable, but it is. It's becoming bigger and bigger business.
So wait a minute. Microtransactions to consume digital content that are full-length movie stories?
Pretty much.
Oh my God, that's brilliant and evil at the same time.
All at the same
horrible.
time.
I just want to watch Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2 in 1 minute increments, please.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm on episode 74, and you haven't seen the whole movie? What the?
Only 580 to go. Yes.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, and it requires, and it's a style of writing I'm really researching to try and understand, but it requires a very specific style of writing because you have to end on a cliffhanger.
I was about to say that. Yeah, it's similar to the serials in the 30s, I'll bet, where you had like Crash Corrigan and those kinds of things, or literally where the term cliffhanger came from. But God, you'd have to do that every 90 seconds. Oof. Like what kind of story? I don't really want to go down this rabbit hole, but I'll just sort of say, what the hell kind of story does that have to be where every minute and a half something turns the world upside down? It's just crazy.
Yeah.
It's almost like just writing an entire novel in microfiction. Gosh.
Well,
right?
Yeah. And I'm actually interested in that, Tim. I think that you would actually be really skilled at that. And it's something I wanted to talk to you about in a different episode, is like how to string together enough flash fiction that it actually holds together as a full narrative.
Oh, they do have, there is a novella in Flash, but that is a term that I've seen over the hill and not taken the walk to go investigate yet. So, but I think that might be what it's like. But yeah, that'd be interesting.
Kat, to your question, Tim is actually publishing quite a bit of flash fiction, and I will now put my mic on mute and let Tim talk about all of his publications. Please go, Tim.
No. Well, I started off as a child. No, I think it's very interesting that you're looking into these sort of short films, because I mean, writing scripts and screenplays is your jam, your deal, your thing. Is it sometimes fun to just take your brain and go, let me try this, let me see what I can do with this, like, or is it something that's a little bit more like, that's, I mean, to me, the vertical short form just seems like kind of a fad, but I'm sure people said that about rock and roll in the 1940s and 50s. So, do you have fun? Do you look forward to that sort of challenge to say, oh, you know what? Wait a minute. That idea would be a great vertical short. Or is it something that you're just sort of like, I'll put off until I need to?
Well, to tell you the truth, and this is something that I really want to work with in my life in general, is that it would really be, is this another source of income?
Right.
And so it's kind of an interesting thing when writing becomes an important part of your income. Important enough that you're like, okay, let me just write one more script and this will be the one that breaks through. And then I don't have to be as concerned about the day to day. And so I'm not at that level where it's like, okay, I've written something that's paying the bills for a year. If I live exactly as I'm living now and I get that big money, then I can live for a year without having to get another job. And then I can refine just the pleasure of writing versus deadlines and does this work and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And so, the pleasure of writing, I still love it, but it has a lot more chain links attached to it than it's ever had before. It carries a very different energy than when it's just like, let me just see what's possible.
Yeah. Now, something that I'm thinking about, just because I'm thinking about this short form of writing, and as Art was talking about, like, I love, just because of my own personal schedule, my job is not a writing job. My job is a job that I, struggle with all the time, like a lot of people do with their sort of full-time job. So the writing for me, I'm writing a lot of that microfiction and smaller stories because of the time I have outside of work. Right. So it's like, I would love to be able to have a career that's more in line with what I like to do, so that I can be like, okay, I can work on longer pieces and longer things like that. So my brain is so tuned into short form right now. Let me ask this. If you're writing vertical shorts, which essentially, I mean, if it's vertical or if it's landscape or, whatever the format is, do you think that the folks that have a little bit more familiarity in writing commercials might have a little bit more, like a little bit of a leg up because, hey, I got to produce a 30-second spot for Burger King that needs to have an arc to sell this thing? Do you think that there might be a different mindset for that might be a little bit easier?
That's a really good question. I think that particularly for those who write more cinematic kind of commercials, like I'm thinking of the ones who write for Volvo or something like that. There's this one commercial in particular that I'm thinking of where it looks very cinematic, and you have a father and a daughter walking towards the camera, and as they come back and we see a bigger picture of what's happening behind them, they've had a car crash and they've managed to walk away. And so you get everything you need to know about the car. It's a Subaru commercial. That's what it is. You get everything you need to know about Subaru and the fact that car accident, they've walked away. The mother runs up and hugs the child, hugs the husband, and we realize that because Subaru is such a safe car, which is what the message is.
Yeah.
And so I think that someone who writes for commercials has a really good visual sense. And I don't know that vertical shorts yet are interested in the cinematic picture. Right. They're not necessarily interested. They're dialogue heavy. And screenwriting, actors love words, screenwriters love words, writers in general love words, but screenwriting is really about what is the picture that I'm trying to create on the screen.
Yeah.
And so I do think that screenwriters might have a little bit of an issue just in the sense of how to set up something in the fewest possible words. I think the perfect combination would be the commercial person who also writes screenplays, because they can, if you have that brain of I need to get to the point, as well as the brain of I need this dialogue to do something. There is no room for just random words with something like this or setting up much of a scene.
Yeah.
That, I think, is the perfect combination. Is the visual person combined with the wordsmith.
Yeah, and you can really tell when you watch a movie which movies were written by writers and which movies were written by directors, or producers.
Yeah.
It's crazy. We were talking about South Korean film earlier. Parasite is one of my favorite movies. It's in my top 20. Of course, lots of people like it. It won an Oscar. But it's a fantastic film. And when you look at how the story and the visuals are perfectly aligned, the whole thing about this class structure and the difference between the people who literally live at the top of the hill and who are rich and whatnot and have lots of sky above their house. And then the other people who live literally at the bottom of this valley and live basically in a basement that floods all the time. Like just visually, it's setting up the difference between high class and low class. And then even, I don't think I'm going to spoil anything, but I'll stop short. But even the ending and sort of how that thing resolves itself still has this element of high and low built into it. It's really, really amazing. And I don't know that you get that if it's just a screenwriter. I really think you have to have somebody who's thinking visually. That doesn't mean that a screenwriter can't think visually and put that into the script, and then a really good director can kind of, make that come alive on the page, or on the screen. But you have to think visually in that way. And that can be harder than just having characters say a bunch of words.
Yeah. Speaking of Parasite, Bong Joon-ho wrote one of my favorite films of all time called The Host, from 2006, which is just this monster movie. And there's one of my favorite scenes I've ever seen in my life where this giant monster has taken this family's youngest girl. And so they're out all night looking for her, and they can't find her, and they come back, and they're so exhausted and they're so tired, and they're eating around a table. And the young girl appears at the head of the table, and they all start feeding her, which is such a wordless, and of course she's not really there, you find out. But it's such a beautiful wordless scene to show how much they miss her and how they would be taking care if they found her. Yeah, it's such, Parasite, The Host, was Snowpiercer too? That's some high level business. Yeah, some good business there.
That was tremendous. And that's one of those movies. There are those movies where I'm like, I don't know if I should do this business anymore because that's incredible. Snowpiercer was one of those where I was just like, what a fascinating idea. The idea of, all of mankind has to ride a train around the world forever. That's brilliant. Yeah. Same with Sinners. Just such a beautiful movie, beautifully written. That is just like, I know. He's pretty much topped us out. I don't know. I
know. And I'm so excited to see it. I've been so I feel like I'm the only person that doesn't know anything about Sinners, and I've managed to stay away from all of it. I'm so happy. I can't wait to see it because I know it's becoming available on streaming, and I'm like, I can't wait to find out what's going on. Yeah. I love watching a film or reading a book where I wish I could experience the joy of watching or reading it for the first time again. Does that make sense?
Yes.
You're like, oh man, Yeah. Such great stuff.
One thing I wanted to bring back from earlier in our conversation was this idea of whether the audience is expecting different things from the level of writing. It's kind of how you kicked us off. And there was this idea that we were kind of swirling around, which was how to, I think, Tim, you had said sort of dumb down the content. The way that I've experienced that is, as if it were soap opera. Soap opera is designed to be able to kind of leave and come back and then get caught up very quickly. And that's the intentionality of that writing style. I wonder if now, with the formulaic type of writing that you were talking about, Kat, and the idea that we are sort of understanding that many people are going to be split in their attention. And that's really how I'm thinking about it is, okay, let me write a movie that you can listen to and still kind of get the gist. And then when you look up from your device and you want to kind of dial into that critical moment, you watch it and enjoy it. But basically, you're kind of watching the movie through one ear. I wonder if that's a prerequisite for some television that's being written, is that is the core assumption that people really aren't watching it the way that they would something that requires your complete and undivided attention.
I think that's true. And I think there are some people who are writing in that style. And I think there are other people who are writing to the Severance crowd, where it really is one of those things with Severance where you have to pay attention. There's all sorts of things happening, and it's happening in such a way that if your eyes aren't on it, you're going to miss it. Where there are other shows, like I just finished watching the first season of 9 Perfect Strangers, and I had my doubts about it when it first came out. And in the end, I was disappointed because I felt like the writing was a little sloppy. And the reason I say it was sloppy is that it felt like you would go through one episode and it'd feel like there was a giant problem revealed, a huge problem. And by the end of that episode, it would be resolved. You go on to the next episode and it's like there was no resolution. None of what had been learned in that previous episode is brought to the next episode. And so it seems like they're dealing with the problem at the same level that they were the day before or the episode before. I think that there is that combination of trying to keep an audience engaged when you know you only have them for a certain amount of time, and those shows who are able to actually capture the viewer. So it's like, even if you think you have to do something else while you're watching this, you're not going to want to. And I think Severance caught that energy and caught that desire to just be with those characters. Because in the end, when you write for TV, that's what it's about. You want characters that people want to be with. In the world we live in today, they want to be with for, 5 or 6 hours at a span if you're doing a whole lot of binge watching. And perhaps that's why, and maybe I've answered my own question, maybe that's why in some TV shows it just doesn't make sense. It feels like the writing is poor. And it's like, well, the writing doesn't have to be grand. It has to be interesting around these characters. And so, yes, the story seems to reset at the beginning of the next episode, but that's okay because we just love seeing the character in this particular circumstance over and over again.
Yeah, exactly. And it's almost like we're not telling one story from start to finish, and that story is the most critical thing that we're paying attention to. It's almost like you're painting a portrait of a world within which there's a story that's moving. I'm thinking about this Netflix show. I'm probably going to say this wrong, but I think it's Kristen Bell and Adam, I forget his name, the guy from the OC.
Nobody Wants This?
That's it, yeah. And it's really good. I enjoy that show, but it's the kind of show you can watch through one ear. I think it's more rewarding if you watch it with your eyes, but you can absolutely just kind of have it on in the background and still enjoy it.
Yeah.
And it's amusing. I don't think it's funny, but it's absolutely, charming and amusing and all the things you want it to be if you want entertaining background noise that has a heart and a plot. But these aren't characters that you're going to care about in a way that, Andor, for example. I don't know if you guys have seen the second season of Andor, but, I'm sure you've seen all the scuttlebutt about it. It's phenomenal. I watched it, straight through, and it's incredible. And it's one of those shows you have to pay attention to, and it richly rewards that. So those are just two different viewing experiences. Even on the same streaming service, you can have shows that do those things. So you can have Severance on Apple TV, but you can also have a show like Loot, which is the, Maya Rudolph, vehicle, which is adorable. Yeah. It's, light and campy and fun. And those are both on the same streaming service. So I wonder, Kat, as you're kind of pivoting to how am I selling when I'm writing to a particular service, maybe that's what you're looking for is like, how do I balance what they already are offering versus what they could be offering? And maybe I write something that kind of fits what they need,
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so now I'm going to flip the conversation around to you guys. How much do you keep a reader in mind as you write? I'm always thinking about the audience. How much of this needs to be explained? How much of this needs to be on the screen? How much of this exposition can I work into a conflict? Because usually you can get a lot of exposition out when two characters are arguing. And so how much does that play into writing when you're writing short fiction or a novel? The concern about the reader.
I can tell you a story that just happened to me very recently, where I have a story that I have submitted, I believe it's about 40 times. And 30 of those, well, actually maybe 35 of those times, the story was completely different. And spoiler alert, it's about a couple who is having an affair. And I had made a huge, drastic change and really rewrote it top to bottom. And I sent it, I'm not sure if I sent the latest version to you, Art, but I did send it to someone who's become a good friend of ours, Emily Rinkema. And when she sent her comments back, she was like, I need to ask a couple questions so I can give you better comments. And what had happened was I had so lost the reader in the experience of writing it that I had to tell her, no, these people are having an affair, because I had written them out of it, because the story had been in my head for so long and through so many different drafts that I was taking out a lot of details to give, a lot of vital details for the reader, because I was like, I forgot that they needed this bit of information or that bit of information. So
right.
I'm sort of stuck in a place where I'm trying not to think so much about the reader, because Art and I have talked about my whiny baby over, why won't this lit mag want me? I'm trying to write for them. And then realizing maybe I should just be trying to write for myself and knowing what I enjoy. But, trying to find that balance between the two. The reader needs to have basic information, like the couple is having an affair,
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. I asked that because a friend of mine wrote a short script, and he wrote it in a really quick amount of time because he lives outside of Los Angeles, but he was in LA and he wanted to work with this director friend of his. And so he wrote this script very quickly. And I thought it was wonderful, just wonderful. But the feedback he got was, it's okay. There are all these things missing. And I really had to sit and think, how was my genius not acknowledged by this other group of readers? But also I realized I know him so well, so the script made perfect sense to me. And
I see. Yeah.
When I finally came back to it after hearing the other notes, I was like, that's probably the problem. All of this makes sense to me because I know him, and the story was kind of coming out of his life experience and all of this, having been in the military. So I was like, of course, this is great. But once I heard the notes from other people, I was like, oh, okay, there are big beats missing here.
Yeah.
Things that the audience has to know. Otherwise, this seems just kind of grim and sad and angry and like serial killer kind of mindset. And it's like, you have to know his experience, his background to understand the pain that the character is in versus they're just, terrible people.
Right.
And so he's going to do a big rewrite on that, which I think is sensible. But it really was one of those things where I know he was writing for an audience, but because I was right there with him during the whole time, I was wondering, it occurred to me, he might be writing for an audience of Kathy.
Yeah.
Like, that might be what he was thinking. It's like, well, if she approves, that's good enough. And I'm realizing, no, he should have taken it to his writers group first. And they would have been able to find this, but he was on such a short schedule.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. It feels like there's almost, I never thought about it that way. When you're reading something and you're like, this is great because you understand the writer and it's such a great personal achievement for the writer, perhaps.
Right.
That, you're close to it.
Yeah. And that's the value of having so many different readers. And I think, him coming to you with that script, Cat, and you having your opinion, completely valid, and it makes it probably for him validates the fact that the story works, but then getting the feedback from the other folks and realizing, oh, it only works for a small subset of people who already come to the story with this context. Okay, well, if I do this revision and I provide that context for a larger audience, then it should hit the same way it hit for Cat. So that'll be good. And I mean, that the only way you get there is with enough readers and enough courage to kind of go back in and do that editing loop. So I think that's very valuable, and so coming back to your initial question, which is who you write for, I mean, you kind of have to write for yourself, I would imagine. but then have enough people around you who can provide you with this context to know whether that story is something that a lot of people want to experience. I can write whatever I want for me, and I can pull it up and read it and feel good about it. Great. But if I'm going to try to get it published or try to get it produced, then it definitely needs to hit for a larger audience. And how large of an audience really depends on what it is and sort of how much work you want to put into it and whatnot. And that's completely up to you as the writer. But you definitely have to write for that one person, whether it's your ideal reader, which we have a whole episode about how to identify your ideal reader, or if you're just writing for yourself, or if you're writing for your best friend, or if you're writing for, a colleague, like you have a writing partner. I'll bet a lot of what you write is for her and she's writing for you. And then you guys are comparing notes. So all of that is just to get it out. Like the whole purpose of that is just to get it on paper. Then you can start going through the editing loop and get feedback and come back to it and write it for a larger audience.